Welcome. I was Chief Learning Officer for the state of Tennessee for 8 years and just recently had the opportunity to join a partner and take our CLO messages and spread them across the country. So that's what I'm doing now because it's practitioner to practitioner, and there is so many messages that we really want to open the doors and spread our CLO gospel, if you will. And as the only Chief Learning Officer in state government, one of the things that we recognized very early on is it's all about relationships. And so today I want to talk about this idea of what it is to the ABCs of XYZs, but I want to disrupt your thinking a little bit. Now, I need your help with this. If you'll turn to your neighbor, high five your neighbor, and tell your neighbor it's all about relationships. Ready? Go. Now, whether you believe that or not, I have 15 minutes to show you it's all about relationships. And as we go through this afternoon, I want to put it all in context, because I want to talk about when I put it in context, I want to look at my family first and foremost. This is my family, and I really call us a micro melting pot of America, because here in my family, we have multiple races, ethnicities, we have multiple cultures that we share, and I've got a Navy veteran. He's my oldest son in the orange shirt. I have my youngest son who is, let's see, to my left, or to your, let's see, which way is it? Yep. Your left. He's up there in the corner with the glasses on. I adopted him when he was 4 hours old, and I'll tell you a little bit more about him in a minute. He has cerebral palsy. I have an 82-year-old mother who plays bridge every day, which, by the way, is a dying art, or so she tells me, because she can't find new bridge players, right? But so my little Spitfire 82-year-old mother, and when I look at our family. And then my other son, that's Quinn, and he lived with us during the week. He became really close friends with Garland in elementary school. His mother they lived in the project. She worked 3 jobs, and so he stayed with us during the week and would go home to her on the weekends. What's amazing about that story is how our cultures came together and we let go a lot of biases and stereotypes, which we're going to talk a little bit about what happens when we do that in our organizational cultures. But I want to tell you, first and foremost, we have a new generation entering our family. This is my 5-month-old grandbaby. And now I didn't ask, or they didn't ask me, if I was ready for a grandbaby. I really thought we had a couple more years for them to just enjoy being together until they announced at family dinner on Sunday, we're gonna have a baby and you're gonna become a grandmother. Now, just the mere word grandmother and granny and mama and ma, I did a statewide search for what should we be called, and my husband actually won the search. I am Lolly and he is Pop, and so at least we're enjoying the moment of being Christian Alexander's Lolly and Pop. But what really I want to tell you about, to put context to the ABZs of XYZs, is I want to tell you about my youngest. So I told you I adopted him when he was 4 hours old. He has cerebral palsy and he has right hemiparesis, which means the right side of his body is where the spasticity is. Now, he is mentally typically developing like all of us, but physically he has a disability. So there's challenges in that as well, as you can imagine, right? But his life story, against all odds, he really has done some amazing things. Those are different speeches and leadership lessons at a later time. The one I want to talk about today is the fact when you look at him, when he graduated from high school, he got a national scholarship to the Art Institute of Tennessee in Nashville. He graduated from college with his bachelor's of science in audio production. All of this is just, yay, we want to clap for Garland, right? Well, this is the story I really want to tell you. See his dreadlocks? He didn't always have dreadlocks. Now, he is half Puerto Rican, half Caucasian, and so we even grew in his childhood a 17-inch afro. It was beautiful, and it was maintained, and it was perfectly round and everything that he wanted. When he went to college, he said, "Ma, I'd like dreadlocks," at which I said, "No." And when he said, "Yep, I want dreadlocks," I said, "Garland, I mean, have you seen dreadlocks that are like, they smell sometimes, or you're sitting behind somebody, things jump out of them, or like they're just messy and they look messy." So my goal with Garland was, okay, if you're gonna do dreadlocks, we're gonna get them done right, we're gonna have them maintained, cleaned, that's how we're gonna do this dreadlock thing. Okay, deal was made, hands were shook, right? So every 3 weeks, Garland goes to the salon to get his dreads washed and locked. Now there's an art to it. And here's the piece I was struggling with. Every 3 weeks, it was costing me $100. So about 3 weeks in, I said, "We're not gonna do dreads anymore." And he said, in his way, in his millennial way, one day at work, he sent me a text, and on that text was a YouTube video of how to wash, lock, and maintain dreads. There were no words. There was just this YouTube video, right? So, as I received this video, I clarified with Garland, does this mean you think that I should do the dread thing? Well, I will tell you today, you all, I'm very proud of this. Those are my dreads. I did them for 5 years, yes. I set up what I call the Ma Salon. And that's me learning to do the dreads. I washed them. Now, here's what's amazing. Every 3 weeks, I got this mother-son time. So there was a lot of benefit to learning how to do this, but I'm telling you, this was a say easy, do hard. But I'm really proud of him. He ended up with 150 dreads, and I think they're beautiful, they're tight. If anybody knows dreads, you could tell me if I'm in denial, because I didn't lose any of them. So I was able to maintain for 5 years his dreads until he graduated from college, which that was amazing. Trying to put a graduation hat on his head with all those dreads that was a whole nother feat. But we accomplished it. He graduated from college, and then I got a picture of him holding his dreads, actually in his left hand, because he calls that his genius hand, his dreads in his hand, and his head shaved. There was no announcement to me. These are my dreads. These are not his dreads to cut. However, as he says to me, "Ma, I got a real job. He works for the Metro Sheriff's Department in Nashville, Tennessee. We're really all excited for him. And as he said, I'm getting a real paycheck, and so I've had my dread phase." Well, but that was with no announcement to me, no warning. So I had to grieve the removal of the dreads by myself. He was fine with them. Now, why do I tell you this story? There's so many things in there about the ABCs of XYZs. So we know there are 5 generations in the workplace, and chief learning officers, practitioner to practitioner. We've been talking about generations for so long. And so today I want to disrupt some thinking. I want to make sure that we know, yeah, there's those 5 generations, and the fastest generation coming in is this iGen, right? The internet generation, that's all they've known. We know they're moving in quickly. We also know the breakdown of the national composite workforce. We know what it looks like, and we know millennials are the highest percentage. We know Gen Xers are right there, and we know that all the generations, though, are present. Traditionalists, even at 2%, are still represented. But see, I think we've talked about generations in the way that has done some damage, and I want I want to disrupt our thinking a little bit. We are in the middle of one of the greatest generational and cultural shifts in our history. We have a theorist, Strauss and Howe, who think that we're now in our fourth turning. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on fourth turning, but it is something for you to consider as you think about what your workplace looks like, what it feels like, what's the culture. And as we actually are creating from the ground up and generations are coming in and generations are leaving, what is the type of workplace that we are creating? In the state of Tennessee, we wanted to be an employer of choice. Government, an employer of choice? And so how do we create a culture that actually can become a reality? Well, one of the things we discovered is there are 3 landmines with this generational talk. We have labeled people, and because we've labeled people, we've licensed certain behavior and we've limited them based on the generations and the boxes that we've put people in. These are the 3 landmines that we continually confront and have to remove barriers. So when we talk about the ABCs, these are the strategies that we have taken that I have seen work in the public sector and also in the private sector. And as we talk about it today, one of the things that I want to really disrupt is how can we change our workforce from looking and interacting with one another through generational lens to creating a culture where now we are creating a workplace of inclusion. So I want to break down what that looks like. We started with, let's affirm. Let's create a culture where affirming people is a number one strategy of how we actually are going to relate to each other. And let's break down the silos and actually get rid of diversity talk and begin inclusion talk. That was a huge shift in how we looked at and how we talk about now creating a go-to culture. Now, with B, one of the things we did was we said we got to boost people's potential. We've got to make sure that we're helping high performers continue to be high performers, but also want to stay and be a part of the place we're creating. So how do we do that? How do we boost people's potential? It's time to teach generations as a cultural competency. It's time to talk about labeling, limiting, and licensing when we group people by generations. Because we have licensed certain behaviors in our workplaces based on the generation that we think people are in. And you can see it behaviorally. And as a behavioralist, one of the things we wanted to do was change behavior. And to actually say, okay, if we're going to use boost and we're going to boost people's potential, what are some things we actually need to do? And so we were really intentional, and when I think about all the organizations I'm working with now, when we're talking about this, one of the tools that has really moved us from managing groups of people, millennials, iGens, baby boomers, Gen Xers, traditionalists, to now let's talk about building individual relationships with people. The stay interview, now it's really important I tell you this, don't use the stay interview on anybody that you're hoping will leave. Because it is actually a tool for you to use with high performers. I'll never forget launching it, managers calling, "This doesn't work." I'm like, "Yes, it does. What do you mean?" And that's when I discovered that I had ill-prepared them for how to use this tool, and they were using it with everybody. Well, you don't build these kind of boosting relationships with everybody. You just use it on your high performers and those that you really want to make sure you're creating a culture around what they're doing. Because as you create culture, it's the people that do that. And it's not a training course, or it's not something that you and I, as practitioners, can actually sit in front of people. It's the people we bring in that create that cultural environment. And finally, C, when we talk about we've got to affirm, we've got to boost for potential, but then we've also got to create coaching strategies, and we've got to create a culture of sharing knowledge. And I don't know about you, but I know people who think knowledge is power, so why don't I just keep it to myself? Versus creating a culture that actually rewards people cross-pollinating ideas, actually sharing with one another. How do we create a knowledge system where all boats rise? Because we all know what's happening and we're communicating. So when we talk about the ABCs of XYZs, 3 simple, say easy strategies that we find need intentionality and deliberation. And that's affirm and boost for potential, and then coach, mentor, and do rotational programs. Do things that actually involve knowledge sharing in your organizations. So as I leave you today, the final thing I want to say is, it is all about the relationships. Thank you.